It looks like it's finally here. In 2019, the then Conservative government and Theresa May announced that they was going to put the end to no-fault evictions and put together a new renters' rights reform. But the can got kicked down the road with loads of backwards and forwards lobbying, and then all the way to the point when Labour got in control, which part of their manifesto before they got into control was, we are going to bring in this no-fault eviction immediately as soon as we are in office. And their promise was, we are going to make this much better. But on the surface of it, it just seems like they've just changed reform to bill, just the title basically. And this week we've had some major updates to this. But before we go over those updates, it's fair to say the rental market is not in its best shape it's been. And in this video, I'm going to give you some of my perspectives from being both a landlord and a tenant at the same time. So I've got quite a unique perspective on both sides of the camp here. And for me, there are 5 major changes that landlords really need to keep their eye on that could affect the market, which I will cover in this video. I'm also going to cover, is this really working? And make sure you hang around to the end, because I'm going to share with you a strategy that a lot of savvy property investors are using to completely sidestep this reform bill. But before we do that, let's look how it's come to this. So take this cup of water. This represents the demand of properties which is needed. So these are the tenants that need homes. And this cup here represents the amount that they are building. So we put this in here, and if you look back in the 1950s, the supply was meeting the demand and there was no real problems with the housing market. But then our population started growing with immigration and things like this, adding more to this demand. But at the same time, what happened was the government stopped building houses, causing obviously a leak in this. Then we're getting more adding to this cup with an aging population, making this obviously go faster. Then good old Maggie Thatcher comes along in the 80s and starts selling off the council homes, which is the largest stock of homes used for rentals, by the way. But then at the same time, we've got more couples getting divorced than they was in the past, meaning couples need 2 homes because they usually got kids and they now need 2 households, all putting a bigger and bigger pressure on the housing market. And governments being governments, because both of these governments, Labour and Conservative, have added to this problem, they, instead of taking responsibility for this, they're pointing the finger at landlords and looking for a scapegoat, in my opinion. And they've decided to wage a war against landlords with all these bills they're bringing in. Listen, I do agree, landlords shouldn't rent out properties in subpar conditions, and there needs to be something to be done about it. However, the approach they're taking now, is this really working? We'll come back to that in a minute, but first let's have a look at these key changes and go over these individually. So the big one is no fault eviction. That was a headline of the thing. So landlords can no longer get their house back after serving a no fault eviction. I've done other videos on this, so I'm not going to go in depth here. It says pretty much what it says on the tin. You don't have to give them a reason. And this is no real changes. They've just changed bill to reform and reform to bill, whichever way around. I get it mixed up. But they're saying the only time you can give a no fault eviction now is if you're either going to live in the property yourself, you're selling it on, or there's major works to the property. I don't see any change from what Conservatives were saying, even though Labour are saying, hey, we're revamping this. It's pretty much the same. I might be looking at this simplistically. Please put in the comments if I am missing something here. That there is a circumstances where you can get this back if you are doing major works, as I said. So major works could be a little loophole around it. If you was doing EPC updates because the government want you to get to an EPC level of a C by 2030, this could class as updates, and you might want to ask a tenant to move out while you do these updates. So if you've got a problematic tenant that's being a bit of a pain, you could potentially use that as a reason to get it out. I've got a load of housing stock, probably a good 10 properties that had tenants living in there for over a decade. So the kitchen, the bathrooms, the property's a bit dated. And as the rents have risen, when I've done my rent reviews, I rose the rent up a bit, but not to full market value. I knew I could get a bit more, but it didn't have the modern kitchens and bathrooms to justify being full market rent. And then I've done a calculation going, I could get these tenants out, but then the void period, spending 10, 15K, getting these back up to standard after tenants lived in there for 10 years to get an extra like 100, maybe 150 a month. I took the lower amount, but what I have been doing slowly as these properties have been going empty, I've been doing them back up and getting the maximum amount for it. So again, you could potentially use this to say, okay, if a tenant's problematic, you say, I need to do the kitchen, the bathroom and major works to it, I'm giving you notice. That could be a loophole. I don't know if these will work, but this is what's coming to my mind. So I think there'll be ways around this anyway. anyway, so I don't think it'll be a major problem. But the government are promising to make the evictions easier for tenants that are in arrears or have antisocial behaviours. If they live up to that promise, there's probably not going to be a need for no fault evictions anyway. The next major change is the monthly rolling contracts with no ending period and starting from every new tenancy. So you can no longer give them a 1 year, 2 year period. It has to be monthly and you can't give an ending period, but there's no change there. But where there is a bigger change is tenants can give you notice after 2 months from the start of the tenancy. So you can't give them a 2 months period, but they can give you 2 months. So they can move in and use this as short-term accommodation. This is not good news. So there's always a cost associated for tenant turnaround, like tenant fines, like tidy ups. Tenants often leave it in a state, and even if they leave it in a state and you've got a deposit from them, chasing them through that deposit scheme, you have to prove it. You still have to find the money yourself to get that property marketable to rent back out. Otherwise it's sitting there empty while you're chasing up to get this deposit back from the protection scheme. So that's not going to be really great for landlords. Tenants can theoretically use properties as short-term lets. There is also a rent control. Rent increases must now follow statutory procedures. So with rent control, they're looking at rent increases, which has pretty much been there anyway. It doesn't seem like that's much new. Which is new, and they're pushing more on, is tenants can now challenge the increase via tribunal. And the tribunal have got a right to go even lower if they deem so. But what's fair rent is what the other houses are demanding, basically. So you just can't jump above that massively. They're also stopping 2 months upfront rent. So more than 2 months upfront rent, sorry, because some tenants used to pay 6 months upfront because their credit was bad. So they'd lend some money from their parents and they'd get into the house that way. Or they had all right earnings, but their credit report wouldn't allow them in. And with the increasing scrutiny on tenants now, because of all these things are in, like landlords are doing more and more checks, it's getting harder for tenants that have got bad adverse history. You might have adverse history for something genuine and back on your feet now, but landlords not taking a risk anymore because of this. The way around this was paying a large amount up front, which is going to go away. I'm indifferent from that. I found in the past, most people that wanted to pay a large amount up front was often people that wanted to grow weed or do something dodgy in your house. So we don't come across that much. So that's not a major effect in my opinion. This one is the standard. Landlords must provide a safe and warm place for tenants to live, basically. I think that should be policed. However, there is double standards on there. Look, a third of council homes are hit with damp problems, and that's just damp problems. They're in a sorry state. So like, why are they pressuring private rented sector when they're not even getting up to the game themselves in the first place? Yes, they should not bypass this, but this leads into the next one. They're now allowing authorities to do up to £7,000 fines. And in my opinion, that's just a money grabbing exercise. Loads of councils are going bankrupt or in major financial difficulties. And I think they're just going to use these fines as a money grabbing exercise. But the reality is, I feel if they worked with landlords as opposed to trying to penalise them and use their money correctly, this would help. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, because a tremendous amount of money is being paid out the back door as a result of this, what most people don't realise. But I'll come back to that. Another change is tenants can seek rent payments and some compensation from landlords with legal obligations and stuff like that if things are going wrong. So they can claim that back now, which is a new thing. I believe if the claim is genuine, that is okay, but I think you're going to get too many phony claims. I believe something like 1 in 5 claims is going to be genuine and 4 of them is going to be chances with these no win, no claim, because they've got nothing to lose to say, oh, can we just play the system and squeeze some money out? And I'm sorry to say, especially at the lower end, I come from a council estate. We brought up with no money. I've got nothing against council tenants. We was one as kids myself, but I believe at that end of the market, you're just going to get these people trying their luck, which I don't think is a good thing on the whole. Again, to squeeze and pressure the market even more and make more landlords not want to come into the sector and make more landlords exit the sector. Now let's look into the evidence to see if there's anything to support the onslaught and the war raged against landlords. So on this article here, we can see many landlords have already left this sector and many more could follow, and lots are disencouraged to enter the market, which is not good. I know a lot of tenants will think this is good news, and a lot of people's thought process is, okay, if there's the same amount of housing to the market and the same amount of people, surely it should balance out. But a lot of less people want to buy a home or in a position to buy a home, especially in the southwest. This is getting hit really hard. But also, typically, less people live in a home when they own it than they do renting. This is statistic. So the supply just doesn't even out at the back end. So it's putting a lot more pressure on the rental market. And look, you can see it on this chart here. Since 2019, when this bill got announced, you can see the upward trajectory we've had and the spike in rent price increases, which obviously is directly related to less supply. It's a simple economic. But the crazy thing that gets me as well is what the government are not telling you front end when they're trying to win votes, saying we'll get these greedy landlords, is all of these tenants that are losing their homes because of landlords fed up with this bill, also because the prices of inflation has pushed up mortgages and repairs, and in the south especially, the numbers are not working and with all these headaches headaches and then the tax and all these different things that are thrown at landlords. Landlords are selling their properties and these tenants need to live somewhere, and the amount of money is being spent on emergency accommodation is going through the roof. But this is also what a lot of smart investors are doing. They're taking their properties away from the rental market and they're renting them out now to social housing providers, because they will give a guarantee-free lease. There'll be no voids, no maintenance to worry about, so you completely sidestep all the hassles what you've got of being a traditional landlord. If you want to learn how to be a social housing investor, you're going to want to watch this video here.